Our guest today is Chris Hedges. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, activist, and the best-selling author of 12 books, including his latest release, Our Class, Trauma and Transformation in an American Prison. Until recently, he also hosted the Emmy-nominated show on Contact for RT America and RT International. His work can now be found on his Substack at chrishedges.substack.com. Welcome back to the show. It's Chris Hedges. Hi, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Jimmy.
Good to see you. You had a great article. I just want to show people this article at your Substack, and it's titled "No Way Out But War." And I just want to show them a little bit of it. The United States, as the near unanimous vote to provide nearly $40 billion in aid to Ukraine illustrates, is trapped in the death spiral of unchecked militarism. No high-speed trains, no universal health care, no viable COVID relief program, no respite from 8.3% inflation, no infrastructure programs to repair decaying roads and bridges, which require $41.8 billion to fix the 43,586 structurally deficient bridges, on average 68 years old. So we could have fixed every bridge that's structurally deficient in the United States. We decided to send it to the military-industrial complex to kill people. No forgiveness of the $1.7 trillion in student debt. No addressing income inequality. No program to feed the 17 million children who go to bed hungry each night. No rational gun control or curbing of the epidemic of nihilistic violence and mass shootings. No help for the 100,000 Americans who die each year of drug overdoses. No minimum wage of $15 an hour to counter 44 years of wage stagnation. No respite from gas prices that are projected to hit $6 a gallon. And the liberal class has retreated into boutique activism, where issues of class, capitalism, and militarism are jettisoned for cancel culture, multiculturalism, and identity politics. Liberals are cheerleading the war in Ukraine. At least the inception of the war with Iraq saw them join significant street protests. Ukraine is embraced as the latest crusade for freedom and democracy against the new Hitler. And so let me bring in Chris. That was quite a list of things that the United States is not investing in the United States. So our government, our culture has decided to not invest in our own country, but instead to fleece the treasury, which is what the CARES Act was. It transferred $5 trillion upward to the richest 1,000 people or so in the United States. And now we're sending $40 trillion just in a grift or a fleece from our treasury to the military-industrial complex. And whatever was left over, we put in cash on pallets and sent to Ukraine, the most corrupt country in Europe. So that's what the United States is doing. And this seems like a joke, like a cartoon. Like they could have ended homelessness in America for that $40 billion. By the way, there was no debate on it. And so the liberal class, you say, has retreated to instead of actually identifying and addressing these problems, they're all caught up in boutique activism and cancel culture and identity politics. So let me bring in Chris Hedges. Chris, how did we get here, and how can we get out of it?
We got here by the perpetuation of the permanent war economy after World War II, justified through the Cold War. And I was in Eastern Europe in 1989. I covered the revolutions in Eastern Europe. We thought naively, of course, that NATO would be disbanded. NATO, which was formed in 1949, was created to prevent Soviet expansion into Eastern and Central Europe. I was there when they promised Moscow under Gorbachev that they would not extend NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany. We actually all talked about the peace dividend, and the arms industry wasn't having it. And I think that was one of the driving forces, probably the major driving force with the expansion of NATO, because you have to refit, all those countries have to refit to be NATO compatible. So 14 countries, Ukraine, even before the war, was a de facto NATO country, and a lot of this is now paid with debt. So we have U.S. debt is $30 trillion. That's $6 trillion more than GDP, which is 24 trillion. We pay 300 billion a year just to service the debt, and that, of course, is going up and up and up. Biden's new defense budget, $813 billion for fiscal year 2023, is more than the next 9 countries, including China and Russia, combined. And what's happened is, and this happens in late empire, it happened in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it happened in the Roman Empire, is that it perverts the domestic economy, in essence, destroys it. And Washington the political class is hostage to corporations, and in particular, the defense, or they call them defense, let's call them the arms industry. And the country is just morally, politically, and economically rotting away. And there's no stopping it. There's no control. Both parties are completely in sync. You played a clip a couple days ago I saw with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I used that quote at the end of my column. You're in a really frightening state when somebody as demented as Marjorie Taylor Greene is speaking a truth about the $40 billion, while, of course, people can't get baby formula. And I think that the establishment, was really one ruling class now. The establishment Republicans have just bonded with the establishment Democrats, who they didn't have much differences with anyway, except for maybe on cultural issues. And I think this is going to play. I think that the whole idea that the Democrats are going to ride the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it allows the states to decide abortion control. So states like Texas, which have virtually outlawed abortion at this point, are going to change. States like New York or New Jersey, where I live, will remain the same. But the idea that they're going to ride that, or ride the Ukrainian war to some kind of comeback in the midterms, I think is very foolish, because people like Trump, or people like, I hate to say it, Green, and I think you pointed this out, and quite correctly, are speaking a very important truth, that the country is just being disemboweled. That was a great quote by Karl Liebknecht, the great German socialist, who called the German military-industrial complex the enemy from within, and that's essentially true.
It's just stunning to me. Like, why wouldn't, like, I mean, I've been asking this question for at least 2 straight years since the lockdown started and COVID started. So when they did the CARES Act and they gave $5 trillion, including Bernie Sanders and everyone in the squad, voted for the largest upward transfer of wealth in human history, which was the CARES Act, which was $5 trillion upward. Why wouldn't they take $40 billion, like they just did it in an eye blink, and gave it to Ukraine? Why wouldn't they give that to our own country also? They act like it's coming out of their own pockets. It's not. They're printing it and they're just handing it to their donors. And is it because that homeless people aren't donors, or workers don't donate enough to candidates? I mean, it would seem to be in the, like what FDR told the people back then. He didn't bring socialism to America. He saved capitalism. And how did he do it? He told the rich people that if we don't give these people some of our money, they're going to take all of our money, meaning a revolution, which he had just seen happen. So what can you get inside their mind? I asked this question to Dylan Ratigan, who used to host a show on MSNBC, and he's a financial guy from Wall Street. And the only answer he could have is that we just live in a rapacious oligarchy. But it's just like, I just can't get past, like, what's stopping them from doing for the United States what they just did for Ukraine?
Because the people who suffer from these effects have been completely disempowered. Half of the country lives in poverty or near poverty, but you never see these people on commercial networks. They've been rendered invisible and even demonized. And then there's no organization. There are no unions. We write the Communist Party out of U.S. history. It was a very important and powerful force in the 1930s, as were the socialists, the old CIO, the Wobblies. There was independent press. Appeal to masses was socialist newspaper, had the 4th highest circulation in the country. And all of that was systematically dismantled with the Red Scare after the Cold War, and the deforming of liberals. So any liberal politician, Henry Wallace, 1948, he'd been Roosevelt's had been his vice president. He ran on an anti-militarist platform. They crucified him. Same with George McGovern in 72. So it became impossible within the liberal wing. We used to have an old liberal wing, Eugene McCarthy and Fulbright and others, who would at least challenge cost overruns and ridiculous weapon systems that were just boondoggles for defense contractors to make money. That's all gone. It's vanished. We're completely helpless, completely powerless. And it's a combination of forces, the consolidation of the media into corporate control, defense contractors. Doesn't General Electric own Rachel Maddow and MSNBC?
They did
or
up
was that
to
Comcast?
there
right?
was it was General Electric used to own a controlling share, but then they sold it to Comcast.
Right. There's another one of the most hated companies in America. So, it's and who are these? This has been you and Glenn and Taibbi and others have all written this, but of course it's just the echo chamber from the military and intelligence industry, all of whom are raking in millions of dollars. I mean, if you finish at a 4-star general, I can't remember what your pension is, 180, 200. I mean, it's really generous, but of course it's not enough. And Austin was working for, what was he on, Raytheon's board?
Yes, Raytheon.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just become so patently corrupt within the system. And we have been so effectively disempowered that, I think, wasn't it 90% of Americans want gun control? I think that's right. Some form of background check. It doesn't really matter anymore because we've lost the only power we had, which was organized power, and we're just being taken for a ride. And you've gone after the squad, I think, correctly. It's just a public relations gimmick, and they all voted for this 40 billion. That's more than 40 because they already got 13.
That's right.
Billion, so it's actually close to 54 billion, and they're talking about long, prolonged conflict and fueling $4 to $5 billion a month into the Ukraine, and these idiots, the Kagans and all the others, Blinken, and they all think that when they finish with Russia, they're going to take down China. That's what Biden was doing in Asia. It's just utter insanity.
Yeah, it's if Trump was doing this is the kind of stuff that people warned that Trump would do. Trump is going to start a war with 2 nuclear powers. Could you imagine if Trump was doing that? They'd be going crazy. But it's Joe Biden and the establishment, and everyone's acting like it's their good Christian thing to do. We have to start a war with, and they're printing headlines in places like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. We have to show that we're not afraid of a nuclear war. Stuff like that. It's the crazy stuff. That's the stuff you thought Trump was going to say,
right.
And now the people. So, and you think that the people in charge are the grown-ups, right? No, they're just smart enough not to tweet like a maniac. That's all that Joe Biden. They're not smart or not grown-ups. They're psychopathic, homicidal maniacs. The people who are running this country, it certainly isn't Joe Biden. If anybody thinks Joe Biden's making one decision, you're also demented, because Joe Biden is demented, and that's not hyperbole, right? That's a fact, and no one wants to talk about it. And so who is making the decisions? We know it's not Kamala Harris. We know it's not Joe Biden. I wonder who it really is. And so it's not Trump that is the maniac. Trump right now, as Chomsky correctly pointed out, is the only statesman of any stature who's calling for peace right now. It's Donald Trump. So the exact opposite of the stuff that we were taught and we were told and we were bombarded with every day for 6 years, that Trump is a maniac, homicidal maniac who shouldn't have his finger on the nuclear button. No, it turns out Trump was actually the peace candidate, and and of course Joe Biden. I mean, I'm not saying Donald Trump isn't a maniac. I'm saying that in this situation, it turns out the reason why he was Russiagated was because he was going against the deep state, because he did run on the Iraq war being a mistake. He did run on pulling our troops out of the Middle East. He did try to get troops out of places, and Joe Biden's like in Somalia, and Joe Biden's sending them right back in, or Ethiopia. There was actually a pause in Africa during Donald Trump's administration, and now we're right back in ramping it up. And you have a very interesting part in your article at your Substack, and I want to read this to the people so we can talk about it. You say in 1992, Defense Planning Guidance Memorandum, U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz argued that the U.S. must ensure a no-rival superpower again arises. So in 1992, then, Defense Planning Guidance Memorandum under U.S. Secretary Paul Wolfowitz argued that the U.S. must ensure no rival superpower again arises, and that the U.S. should protect its military strength to dominate a unipolar world in perpetuity. So that was in 1992, okay? And then later on in the late 98, on the Today Show, Secretary of State under Clinton, Madeleine Albright, gave the Democratic version of this same unipolar doctrine. She said, if we use force, it is because we are Americans. We are the indispensable nation, she said. We stand tall and we see further than other countries into the future. So this is, and so what was the result of that policy, which was both Democrats and Republicans coming together under the same unipolar doctrine, meaning that the United States should be the only superpower and there should be no check on us? And what was the result of that? Well, the military strikes they casually used to assert the doctrine of unipolarity, especially in the Middle East, swiftly spawned jihadist terror and prolonged warfare. None of them saw it coming until the hijacked jets slammed into the World Trade Center Twin Towers. That they cling to this absurd hallucination is the triumph of hope over experience. So I see them doing the even worse things now than this, right? So the stuff that they did in the 90s, the blowback from it was the World Trade Center and things like that, Osama bin Laden. And now what they're doing is they're going to wreck the dollar. That's happening. The dollar being the world currency, that's going to go away because of and they're doing it right out in the open, and they're starving our own country as we flood Europe with weapons and cash to the most corrupt people there. So it makes me extra nervous that this is going to keep going, and this will never stop. And we're going to really, this people talk about we're at the end of an empire, end stage capitalism. This is all real. It's happening right out in the open, and no one's doing anything about it. And if anybody does stand up and say something, they're immediately marginalized, right? They're immediately, or look what they do to Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, yourself. They took all your stuff off YouTube. They call those people right-wingers to try to discredit them. So I don't even know if there's a question in there. It's just more of a fear. If you want to respond to any of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote a column called "The Pimps of War," which was largely on the Kagans and Victoria Nuland, all these figures that never go away. I mean, Victoria Nuland is now working for Biden.
Yep.
I think she's number 3 in the State Department. She was Cheney's chief policy advisor. Obama had these people in the White House. So it doesn't, they serve both parties, and all of these think tanks, the Project for the New American Century, American Enterprise Institute, Foreign Policy Initiative, Institute for the Study of War, Atlantic Council, Brookings, they are lavishly funded by the defense industry, which is why people like Fred Kagan, remember, these people are just wrong about everything. I started as a journalist covering the war in El Salvador. And that's when I first ran into these nutcases like Elliot Abrams, and Robert Kagan was working for him. He was the director, State Department's public diploma in the State Department Public Diplomacy Office. They were just propagandists for the death squads in Guatemala, in El Salvador, or the Contras, who were just drunken rapists and sadists and thugs and killers. And their job was really to attempt to discredit all of the reporting that we were doing on the ground. They've been wrong about everything. They were wrong about Iraq. They thought we were going to invade Iraq and democracy was going to emanate outwards across the Middle East and rechange the entire landscape of the Middle East, including Iran, and American hegemony and power would be resurrected. They were wrong about Syria, wrong about Libya, wrong about Afghanistan. They're wrong about Russia. And they're writing. I mean, you should read this stuff. It's very frightening. I mean, they are just so cavalier about taking or antagonizing a nuclear power. And you've got Kagan, for instance, in the latest issue of Foreign Affairs, essentially saying, "Don't worry, Putin isn't going to use the bomb." It's the fact that these people don't go away. It's like some kind of bacterial strain or something you can't get rid of. Well, of course, they're perpetuated because they are the shills for the war industry. That's it. And I have far more experience in the Middle East than any of these people. I spent 7 years there. I spent months of my life in Iraq. I speak Arabic. I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. So, but because I won't parrot that narrative, I'm completely blanked out. It's not a matter of picking anybody with any real world experience. It's about people, self-identified experts and specialists who essentially work as pimps for the war industry, and they're lavishly paid for it, and they have prominent platforms. Who's that guy? David Frum. Remember David Frum?
Yes. Yes.
I was on Lawrence. I was invited to be on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, which surprised me. And I said I would only go on if I had 20 minutes. I wasn't going to, and they assured me that I would. And I'm sitting there, and they put that makeup on your face. I'm sitting in the room with Frum, and suddenly the producer comes in and goes, "You're not on." They gave all my time to Frum. That's MSNBC. And this is the guy, axis of evil. I mean, this guy is awful, Islamophobe and everything else. So, the rot is palpable. And I think that, I, of course, don't ever loathe Trump like many people. But many of the supporters of Trump and supporters of people like Green, I mean, what happened when Green essentially said, we can't get baby formula for our kids, and we're sending $40 billion, which they had no time to read. I think they get it like 3 o'clock or something.
3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they did not have time to read the bill.
Yeah, they didn't even have time to read it. It's just, and nobody even knows how it's going to be dispersed. It's just like Syria in that sense. I think that there is a feeling among a huge segment of the population, and they're not wrong, that they're being had. And if the only people who are going to be honest about their being had come from these kind of proto-fascists, then we're in serious trouble. I mean, the quote-unquote squad, even Barbara Lee, Pelosi made her trip to Kyiv, and I like Barbara Lee. I mean, she was the only person to stand up in the House or the Senate against unlimited authorization to wage war after 9/11. Even she signed on. They've all signed on for this insanity. You're talking about repugnant figures who speak truth. I mean, I think at the top of the show you mentioned Kissinger, because Kissinger comes out of that old kind of Cold War and that Sino-Soviet split. Always the tactic was to keep China and Russia from ever forming an alliance. And of course, what Biden has done is propelled them into each other's arms because Russia has nowhere else to go, and they're carrying joint military exercises off the coast of Japan. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to pretend to tell you when the dollar will collapse, but they're certainly working overtime. I mean, to make sure, as you said, Italy's paying in rubles, that to sever theirself from the dollar. Once they replace SWIFT, which is the international money transfer system, once they can set up a system like that, then we go back and look at the 1950s in Britain when the pound sterling was dropped as the world's reserve currency. That plunged Britain into a pretty severe depression, and we won't be any different. Nobody's going to want to buy our treasury bonds. The value of the dollar will plummet a third, 2/3, who knows? But it's going to be really, really grim.
Well,
because we're running on fumes. I mean, the empire runs on debt.
Yeah, I know, and it runs on the petrodollar, and they're doing everything they can to get rid of it. And here is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and let me just show a little bit of that.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian supplemental bill. $40 billion but there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies.
So now, you mentioned this in the article, and I've already shown this on my show. And my point is that yes, when someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene easily gets to the left of the Democratic Party, including the Squad and Bernie Sanders, that spells disaster for the United States. That's the point. And people get mad that I point that out instead of, again, we're a nation full of adult children of alcoholics. And one of the hallmarks of being an adult children of an alcoholic is that you don't get angry at the person who's abusing you. You get angry at the person who points out that that person's abusing you. I've experienced that my whole life. And so that's what happens here. So when people like Chris Hedges, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, myself, we point out stuff like this, people then get angry at us instead of angry at the thing they should be angry at, which is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing what the Squad should be doing and Bernie Sanders should be doing, and that's disgusting. And imagine if they could join together. Imagine if the Squad, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who else? There's 100 progressives in the progressive caucus. Maybe we could have done something, but no. And by the way, this was all show. So what's weird about this is that she articulates the problem. So it shows you that they all know the problem. She went on to vote against baby formula relief. So it just goes to show you they know what's going on and what should be done, and they can articulate it when it serves their partisan purposes. But when it actually comes to do something, nobody's going to do anything for you. Nobody. Isn't that right, Chris?
Yeah, it's all burlesque. It's all political theater on both sides of the aisle. We have serious existential threats, new pandemics, the environmental emergency, and the proposed budget for the CDC next year is $10.675 billion. The proposed budget for the EPA is $11.881 billion. Ukraine got more than double that.
Yes.
And this is, the real crises that we face, the real dangers that we face are irrelevant. War is all that matters. And that is a recipe, as past empires have shown, for just collective suicide. And I see no confrontation there's and you're right, that just because they speak a truth, just because Trump speaks a truth about the war in Iraq, to be fair to Trump, he did set a timetable to withdraw from Afghanistan, but he ratcheted up the economic war with Venezuela. He reinstituted sanctions against Cuba and Iran, which the Obama administration had ended. He also increased the military budget by 10%, I believe. He apparently wanted to carry out a missile strike on Mexico to destroy drug labs. Yes. But he did articulate a truth that I think resonates, and the cowardice or the kind of careerism that has gripped the supposedly progressive wing of the Democratic Party has silenced it. In the long term, that truth is the most powerful weapon they have, and they're not using it. It's why Bernie I think both of us were pretty critical of Bernie, but Bernie wouldn't go after the Democratic Party.
No.
The Democratic Party was as to blame for the debacles that were visited on the working class and the rest of the country as the Republicans, especially Clinton. That inability to speak the truth about what's happening to the society and ceding that to figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Trump is really dangerous. Even the Democrats all now project that they're going to get shellacked in the midterms.
And they don't care. They don't care because they don't work for you. They don't work for me. They are self-interested dealers who work for the military-industrial complex, Big Pharma, Wall Street, oil companies, and telecommunications, and Silicon Valley. That's it. That is it. And if you think otherwise, just look around. Just look around.
Oh, just look where they go as soon as they leave office.
That's right.
And that's just the insidious, flagrant, open corruption is staggering. There's even no shame about it anymore.
Barack Obama has a 48-acre estate on Martha's Vineyard. What the? That's the guy. That was the head of the Workers' Party.
There you go. Well, there was Clinton left office because of legal bills owing $1 million. He and Hillary are now worth 126 million.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, of course, they set up that they all set up these foundations.
Yeah,
which just becomes a way to kind of funnel money. The Clintons were shameless about it when she was Secretary of State. There's a figure I forget, but it's the numbers of donors to the Clinton Foundation who then got direct access to the Secretary of State was
people like Saudi Arabia. The good
Uber.
People. The good people.
All the good people. Yeah.
Everybody check out Chris's article at his Substack, chrishedges.substack.com. It's a great article. It's a great read. You're going to want to pass it around. Hey, we're doing stand-up comedy in Irvine, California, Las Vegas, San Diego, Salt Lake City, Indianapolis, Louisville, all over the place. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for tickets.